Good evening, Shavua Tov, good Vok. Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Frank in San Pedro. Are we a little early? People aren't expecting us yet. They'll find us. This light is a little bright, isn't it? We'll survive. How's everybody doing? Great to be starting a new week. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Mark Wolf in memory of his parents, Samuel and Lillian Wolf. May the neshamas, may the souls have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world of souls. Mark, I know your parents are cavelling. They're so proud of you and all the wonderful work you do in the community. You're a real mensch. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say, Amen. Okay, doing a double daf. We're a little bit behind because I was away for a week. So we'll do a double page tonight, helping to get us caught up. I think we're probably running about 4 pages behind, 4, maybe 5. And we're approaching the end of this very long tractate, Bava Basra. Tonight's dafs are pages 168 and 169. Continuing our discussion of chapter 10, Mishna number 3, which God willing will complete tonight, get into Mishnas 4 and 5 as well. Okay, right near the top of page 168a, our Mishna taught that the husband gives the scribe's wages for writing a gett, a bill of divorce. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Why does the husband pay for a gett? And the Gemara, and for the scribe to write the gett. And the Gemara answers, as the verse states, this is Deuteronomy 24:1, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it comes to pass, if she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some unseemly matter in her, he shall write her a scroll of severance and give it in her hand. It says he must write it. It is therefore the husband's responsibility to have the gett written. And the Gemara adds, but today, right, so the Gemara is speaking, possibly sometime between 15 and 1800 years ago, but already things had changed. The Gemara says, but today, the reason that we do not do so, but instead have the woman pay the scribe, is that the sages placed the burden upon the woman, so that the husband should not delay the divorce by refusing to pay the scribe. This very much gets at that law of unintended consequences. You might think that in a very patriarchal society, where the husband has the unilateral power to give a divorce, right? To divorce his wife, she can't divorce him. Only he can divorce her. As the Torah says, he must give her the gett. And then you say that, well, no, the woman has to pay the scribe. It's like adding insult to injury. She's in a position, sort of at his power. And on top of that, she has to pay the scribe. But what they're saying is, yeah, sounds good, but sometimes a husband will withhold the gett when the marriage is obviously over. She wants and needs to be free of him. And this guy will just keep delaying and delaying, and one excuse he'll use is, I can't find the scribe, I can't pay for a scribe, I don't have money to pay for the scribe. So they just allow her to hire the scribe and write the gett and say, here's the gett, just give it to her so she can be free of you. One of those many cases in life where, what sounds equitable isn't necessarily so in the real world. The Mishna taught a scribe may write a promissory note for a debtor who requests one, even if the creditor is not with him. And it is the debtor who gives the scribe his wages. So the Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that the debtor, the one taking the loan, the borrower, that he pays the wages of the scribe? After all, he is the beneficiary of the loan. And the Gemara answers, no, it is not obvious, and it is necessary for the Mishnah to state this, as there are times when the loan is beneficial to the creditor as well, as in a case of a joint venture, where the creditor receives a share of the profits engendered by the money provided to the borrower. We talked about that in Tractate Bava Basra, where a lender lends money to someone so that he can have his share of a business that they're going into together. And then once the one who's borrowing the money so that he can also invest in it, then they can start up the business, and he's going to be the one who actually runs the business, and the one who's loaning the money for the other guy to own his half and then investing in the second half. And now the business is up and running, and that guy can make money from the business, right? The one who puts up the capital can make money from the business. So you might have thought that he should be the one to pay the wages of the scribe. But in fact, even in this case, the borrower pays. The Mishnah also taught that a scribe may write a bill of sale for a seller of property who requests one, even if the purchaser is not with him when he presents his request, and it is the purchaser who provides the wages of the scribe. And the Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that the purchaser pays the wages? After all, he is the beneficiary of the sale. Now there it's interesting because you might think, wait a minute, when somebody sells something, who's the beneficiary of that transaction? Isn't it the seller who gets the money? But of course, if it's a proper transaction that's well balanced, well, he gets the money, the other guy gets the property. And if it's a proper sale, they should equally be benefiting from it. But if somebody is selling real property, which is what we're often talking about here, somebody's selling land, okay, well, that's what the land was worth at that time. But the one who ends up with the land ends up with real property. And so he's understood to be of having a greater benefit than the one who has to give up that piece of land. So you might have thought that therefore he's the one who has to pay the wages of the scribe. And the Gemara answers, no, it's not obvious, and it is necessary for the Mishnah to state this, as sometimes the sale is beneficial to the seller as well. As in a case of one who sells a field because of its poor quality, and he is anxious to be rid of it. Now, the Mishnah teaches a scribe may not write documents of betrothal and documents of marriage except with the consent of both the groom and the bride. And it is the groom who provides the scribe's wages. So the Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that the groom pays the wages? After all, he is the one who's technically acquiring his betrothed. And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary for the Mishnah to state this to teach us that it applies even when the groom is a Torah scholar, in which case it gives his father-in-law satisfaction to bring him into his family by having him marry his daughter. Even in such a case where the bride's family is the beneficiary, it is the groom who pays the wages of the scribe. The Mishnah taught a scribe may not write contracts for sharecroppers and contractors except with the consent of both parties, i.e. the sharecropper or the contractor, and the one who hires him, i.e. the landowner. And it is the sharecropper or contractor who provides the scribe's wages. Can you guess what comes next? The Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that the contractor pays the wages? After all, the contract details his rights to take over the field and farm it. And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary for the Mishnah to state this, as sometimes the deal is detrimental to the contractor, as in the case of a fallow field. And it might have been thought that in this case, the cost of the document is borne by the landowner, but it's not. And the Mishnah teaches a scribe may not write documents testifying to arbitration or any other court enactment, except with the consent of both parties of the litigation, right? He's going to write up the judgment that was given by the court that these litigants received at the court. Both of them have to be present when the scribe is writing up the judgment. The Gemara asks, what is meant by documents testifying to arbitration? Here in Babylonia, right, Babel, the sages interpret it to mean documents recording the claims of the two parties to the litigation. And Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says a document testifying to arbitration is one that records the procedure in which the composition of the court is chosen. And this is described in Tractate Sanhedrin, which is our next tractate, beginning next week, I suppose, whereby this litigant chooses one judge, and that litigant chooses one judge, and then these two judges choose the third one. And this document of arbitration lists how they came to compose the court of three. Now, the Mishnah teaches that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says the scribe writes two documents for the two parties. This was the minority opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. One for this one by himself and one for that one by himself. What does that mean? Are they getting two copies of the judgment, one for each of the parties, or does it mean something different? The Gemara analyzes the disagreement between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the first Tana of our Mishnah, who did not call for two separate documents, but it simply said that it shall be written in the presence of both litigants. So shall we say that they disagree with regard to the principle that the court coerces people to prevent conduct characteristic of Sodom, i.e. selfish behavior? That is, the case is where one of the litigants does not want to contribute to the writing of a joint document and insists that each litigant pay to have his own document written, which would entail an additional expenditure on the part of the other party. And perhaps one of the parties has money and the other one doesn't. The one who doesn't, it's already been excruciatingly difficult and expensive to be part of this litigation. Now I'd like to just be done with it. But they have to, co-pay for the scribe to write up the judgment. And the one that has money says, I don't want to share in a judgment with you, even the cost of the actual paper judgment. You get your judgment, I'll get mine. So are we going to say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel allows that? He allows that they can have separate judgments, even though it's going to hurt the poor guy. But the majority opinion does not allow that. Is that what's going on? Or is that not what's going on at all? It's actually something different. So the dispute, if that's the case, would be as follows. One sage, the first Tana, holds that the court coerces people to prevent this conduct of forcing the poor one to pay for his own copy of the judgment. And so the obstinate litigant is forced to pay his share of a joint document. They share it. And the other sage, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, holds that the court does not coerce people to prevent this conduct, and a litigant can insist upon paying only for a document of his own. Let the other guy pay for his document. But the Gemara rejects this analysis. No, that's not what's happening here. Everyone in the Mishnah holds that the court coerces people to prevent the conduct that is characteristic of Sodom, where everyone is selfish. And here, this is the reason for the ruling of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. It is because the litigant demanding separate documents is not making a pointless and selfish request at all. As he says to the other litigant, it is not amenable to me that your defense, i.e. the record of your claims, should be together with my defense, as you are to me like an ambushing lion, i.e. our interests are in conflict. In other words, when you walk away from a court case and you have a judgment in your hand, the reason that judgment matters is because you may have to show at some later date that, you had a litigation with this person, the judges ruled on it, and as a result of that litigation, you now own this piece of land, and it's free and clear, and you can sell it, right? But you might have to produce evidence of that. And maybe as a result of this litigation, the other guy ended up with a separate field, and that field is now free and clear, and he can sell it, right? So both of you walked away from the litigation with something that is free and clear of further litigation, and you need evidence of that. If there's only one paper judgment of that, and let's say he's got it so that he can go and show it and make a deal with his land that he walked away from the litigation with, and now you need to show that judgment to someone else so you can sell the piece of land that you received in that litigation. Do you want to go and deal with this guy that you just had a long drawn-out legal battle with? No, you don't. You'd rather have your own copy of the judgment. That's not selfish behavior. That's human and normal. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 10, the final chapter of Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. Now, Mishnah number 4. in the case of a debtor who repaid part of his debt and, with the agreement of the creditor, deposited the promissory note with a third party serving as a trustee to ensure that the creditor would not collect the full amount. And the debtor said to the trustee, if I have not given you the balance from now until such and such a day, give the creditor his promissory note, thereby enabling him to collect the full amount stated on the note. So then, if the stipulated time arrived and the debtor did not give the balance to the trustee, Rabbi Yosei says the trustee should give the promissory note to the creditor in accordance with the debtor's stipulation. And Rabbi Yehuda says the trustee should not give it as the stipulation is void. So just to review that, you lend me $100. I owe you $100. I give you a promissory note. That is evidence that I owe you $100. So with that note, you could say, Sal, give me my $100 or I'm going to go to court and sue you to get that $100. I don't have $100, but I have $20. So I say, okay, here's $20. And now let's take your promissory note and give it to somebody that we both trust. Okay, Johnny over here. Johnny's going to hold the promissory note. The reason Johnny's holding it is because I've made partial payment. I gave you $20. The promissory note records that I owe you $100. We're not going to alter the promissory note. You could give me a receipt that I paid you $20 of the $100, but we're doing it a different way. Instead, we're letting Johnny hold the note. We all know that I gave you $20, and the arrangement is that if I don't give Johnny on your behalf, he's going to then give it to you. If I don't give him the $80 by the end of the year, then he's going to give, if I give him the $80 before the end of the year, then he's going to give the note to me and the $80 to you, and we're done. But if the end of the year comes and I haven't given him the $80, he's going to give the promissory note back to you. The $20 that I already gave to you, lost. It's a penalty because I said I was going to pay by a certain date and I didn't. That's the loss that I was risking, and I understood that when we made this arrangement. So if I don't pay by the end of the year, you get the note back. I'm out the $20. I still owe you $100. So what they are disagreeing about is if we made that arrangement, Rabbi Yosei says when the end of the year comes and I didn't pay the $80, indeed, we follow the arrangement and Johnny gives you back the promissory note. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, there's something wrong with this whole arrangement, as we will discuss. And therefore, Johnny doesn't give you back the promissory note. So let's see what was wrong with this arrangement according to Rabbi Yehuda. And in fact, the law follows Rabbi Yehuda in this. So says the Gemara, with regard to what principle do Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Yehuda disagree? Rabbi Yosei holds that an asmachta. What is an asmachta? An asmachta is a transaction with inconclusive consent. Do I consent that he should give you the promissory note back and I'm out the $20? Well, sounds like I do consent to that. I was a party to this arrangement. But what they're going to argue is, but I thought I would pay by the end of the year. That's what I intended to do. I never imagined that I wouldn't be able to pay by the end of the year. And if I hadn't done that, if I didn't imagine that, I wouldn't have consented to risk $20. Maybe even I gave him $90. And I said, listen, if I don't give you the missing 10 by the end of the year, then you can give him back the note and I'll be out the whole 90 and owe the 100 still, right? But I would only say that because I was sure that I was going to come up with the missing 10. So I didn't mean to end up in this highly penal, right, penalizing situation. So Rabbi Yosei holds that this kind of transaction with inconclusive consent, which is known as asmachta, that it affects acquisition, that it works, you can do it. In this case, the debtor, right, the borrower, willingly undertook a penalty if he would not repay the remainder of the debt on time. Yet he did not think that he would miss the deadline and be held accountable to pay the penalty. Rabbi Yosef holds that he is nevertheless bound by his word. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that an asmachta does not affect acquisition, right? Meaning it is not binding. So Rav Nachman says that Rabbi Bar Abu says that Rav says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. I'm out the penalty. This all works. When questioners came before Rabbi Ami inquiring of him what the law is in this matter, he said to them, but since it is the case that Rabbi Yochanan taught us a first time and a second time, meaning repeatedly, that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, what can I do to contradict his words? And the Gemara concludes, but in fact, the halacha, the law, is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, i.e. an asmachta is not binding. And that's it for Mishnah number 4. We move on to Mishnah number 5. In the case of a creditor whose promissory note has become erased, he should produce witnesses who remember the details of the document to testify about it. Erased accidentally, like the ink just, was left in the sun and the ink bleached and wore away. So he brings witnesses who remember the loan. And they come before the court and they ratify his promissory note for him, stating the promissory note of so-and-so, which, by the way, in Aramaic, so-and-so, or in Hebrew, they say ploni, right? Ploni is usually translated in the Quran as so-and-so. I think in maybe in the art scroll, they say so-and-so, or they say every man. It's just Ploni, and sometimes they say Ploni ben Ploni, or so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. But it's a very nice term, Ploni, that just means some guy, okay, some guy. And they come before the court, and they testify about his promissory note for him, saying that the promissory note of Ploni was erased. And it stated that a loan for such and such an amount took place on such and such a date, and this Ploni and that Ploni were the witnesses. So the ratification document is signed, and it may be used as a replacement for the erased document. That's the Mishnah. Now we're on page 168b with the Gemara. The sages taught what is the text of the ratification document of an erased document. The court writes as follows: we, Ploni and Ploni and Ploni, were the names of the judges, were sitting as 3 judges, and Ploni ben Ploni, right, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, produced an erased document before us, which was written on such and such a date. And Ploni were its witnesses. And if it is written in this ratification document also that we engaged in the investigation of the testimony of the witnesses, and their testimony has been found to be congruent, so now the creditor, right, the lender, can collect his debt on the basis of this ratification document, as he does not need to bring further proof. He proved it in court. So now he has a ratification document to replace the erased document. But if this formula is not written, then the creditor needs to bring further proof of the loan in order to collect it, right? He needs a properly written ratification document to replace the erased document. If it isn't properly written with the correct formula, he's going to have to prove it again at the time that he comes to some other court to make his claim. So the Baraisa continues with its discussion of damaged documents. If a promissory note was torn intentionally, it is not valid. But if it became torn accidentally, it is valid. In a case where it was erased or smudged, if its imprint is recognizable, i.e. if the words are still legible, though barely, it is valid. The Gemara seeks to clarify the terms in the second part of the Baraisa. What are the circumstances, i.e. what are the defining characteristics of a document that was torn, and what are the circumstances of a document that became torn, right? One that was torn on purpose versus one that was torn accidentally. Rav Yehuda says a document that was torn means that it had a tear created by the court because they wish to render it invalid due to payment of the loan or some other circumstance. For some reason, the court canceled the promissory note, so they purposely tore it in half. A document that became torn by means of a tear and a document that was accidentally torn, well, this is one that was torn outside of a court. So interesting. It's not necessarily that whoever the person was that tore it, whether he did it on purpose or accidentally, is what's dispositive. No, what they mean is purposefully torn means torn by a court and therefore canceled. And any other kind of tearing, whether it was done by the dog that ate the homework, or a kid, or your enemy who walked into the house and says, "Oh, I see somebody owes you money." Not anymore. Wrong. He tore it on purpose, but he's not a court, and so it's still a valid promissory note. The Gemara seeks further clarification. What are the circumstances, i.e., what are the signs of a document that had a tear created by the court? So Rav Yehuda says the document has a tear that ruins the place of the witness's signatures, and the place of the date, and the place of the essential part of the document. The court knows how to tear a document to tear it properly. And Abaye says it has a tear that goes both lengthwise and widthwise. Now, obviously, your enemy could tear it the same way if he knows how courts tear. But this is minimally what would be required for the court for us to say that it was torn by a court. Now, the Gemara relates, there was once a certain group of Arabs who came to Pumbedisa and who would rob people's land and force the victims to surrender the deeds to their property to prevent subsequent legal action. So the owners of land who had not yet fallen victim to these Arabs came before Abaye and said to him, "Let the master look at our deeds to our property, and let the master write us another deed for it, so that if one of the deeds is robbed, we will have the other one in our possession." Right? They want duplicate deeds because they fear that these marauders will come and forcibly take the land and seize the deed. Or at the point of a sword, force them to give make a sale based on that deed when they really don't mean to. And so therefore they want to have a backup deed. What's the problem with this? If you actually have two deeds in a society that was not based on having copies of everything, but rather where there was one deed for a piece of land, well, now that there's two deeds in such a society, the landowner could sell his field twice, right? That's the problem. Abaye said to them, "What can I do for you? I cannot comply with your request." As Rav Safra says, one may not write two deeds of ownership for one field, lest the owner of that land repossess property once and then go back and repossess it once again. For example, if he sells it and he sells it, but he accepts that the buyer will pay him over time, and then the buyer doesn't pay, so he can use it to repossess the field. Well, maybe he sells it to two buyers who are paying over time, right? Which obviously is not permitted, but he could maybe get away with if he has two deeds. Generally, whenever real estate is sold, there is a guarantee given to the purchaser in the event that the land is repossessed by the seller's creditor. So this is something a little different. Or by someone else who proves that the land rightfully belongs to him, right? So the purchaser gets a guarantee that if it turns out that the seller didn't have the right to sell it because there was a lien on his land from some creditor, and if he doesn't pay that loan, then the creditor can seize the land, in which case the purchaser will lose it, but the guarantee means that he can at least get his money back from the seller. So again, generally, whenever real estate is sold, there's a guarantee given to the purchaser in the event that the land is repossessed by some creditor of the seller or by someone else who proves that the land rightfully belongs to him. Maybe it was a contested piece of land, and some other person comes up and shows, actually, you never had the right to sell that land because it's mine. If the seller of the repossessed land has no money to honor the guarantee, the purchaser can repossess property from others who had purchased property from the same seller subsequent to the sale of the repossessed land. And in order to do so, he would have to produce the bill of sale proving that he had purchased the repossessed property. If he has two such deeds, he would be able to collect payment twice. To eliminate this possibility, duplicate property deeds are not written. The landowners kept badgering Abaye to write the duplicate documents until, in order to be rid of them, he said to his scribe, "Go write the document for them. But first, write on paper and then erase it, and then write the desired document over the erased text, so that the text of the document will be written over an erasure, and the signatures of its witnesses will be written on a part of the paper where the writing had not been erased, a situation in which the document is not valid," as we just learned last week. Rav Acha bar Minyumi said to Abaye, "But perhaps the first writing on the paper was not erased thoroughly, so that its imprint is recognizable, and it is taught in the Baraisa that in a case where the writing on a document was erased or smudged, if its imprint is recognizable, the document is valid." And Abaye said to him, "Did I say that he should write a proper document and then erase it? I said, i.e., I intended that he should merely write letters of the alphabet, not actual words, then erase that, write this faulty deed on that, but the witnesses would sign on a place that has not been erased, and therefore creates an invalid document, and that way he'll get rid of these people who are badgering him." The sages taught in a Baraisa, in a case where one came to court and said, "My promissory note was lost," even if witnesses said, "We wrote and signed such a promissory note and gave it to this man," the court may not write a new document for him. And the Gemara asks, well, in what case is this statement said? In the case of documents detailing loans. But in the case of deeds of buying and selling land, the court may write a replacement document, excluding the standard guarantee that was in the first document, which states that if the field is repossessed, the seller will compensate the purchaser for his loss. That part has to be omitted for the reason we just stated, but you can get a replacement deed. Promissory note, you lose that, you can't get a replacement promissory note because then there would be two notes for the same loan. So imagine in such a society where copies were so it was so non-standard to have multiple copies, you better hold on to your promissory note, to your deed of sale, etc. Page 169a at the top. The Baraisa continues. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says the court may not write a replacement document even for deeds of buying and selling land. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says as well, with regard to one who gives a gift of land to another and the recipient returned the deed to him, his gift of land returns to him as well. But the rabbis say his gift of land remains in the possession of the recipient. So the Gemara analyzes this Baraisa. Master says in the Baraisa, with regard to deeds of buying and selling land, the court may write a replacement document, excluding the guarantee that was in the first document. And what is the reason that the guarantee may not be written? And Rav Safra says it is because the court may not write two deeds of sale for the same sale of one field, lest a creditor of the seller go and repossess the field sold to this purchaser, and then that purchaser go and take out one deed, and in accordance with the guarantee clause of the sale, repossess land from other purchasers who purchased land from the same seller at a later date, and then say to the creditor, "Remain quiet about this matter for a few years while I become established in the property that I repossessed. And then come and claim your loan again, and then you will repossess this property from me, and then after it is taken from him a second time, the purchaser will then take out the other document of sale, the replacement that the court had written for him, and then go and repossess land from other purchasers who purchased the land from the same seller. In short, a replacement document with a guarantee will enable double collection on that guarantee." Okay, we don't have to unpack that whole thing. The point is that somebody could game the system, right? And so if there was a replacement deed, somebody could game the system and take advantage. And what I'm reminded of is, whenever you enter into a contract, whether you're starting a partnership or you're buying and selling something, taking a loan, right? There's that, near the beginning, there's the whereas, why you're doing this, then the actual terms and conditions that's important in this contract that you're entering into, and then there's all the standard clauses, right? About where you're going to litigate if you need to litigate, and that you will, what's the word? What's that word? the indemnification clauses, and that you have the right to enter into this, and if you don't, you'll pay. There's all these standard clauses, right? And there's so many of them, and you're like, I mean, really, do we really need to say all this stuff? But every one of those standard clauses, which seemingly does not apply to your situation at all, or only in the most extreme circumstances, but every one of those clauses is in that contract because at some point somebody did litigate it, and there was a problem. And they didn't anticipate that problem would come up when they entered the contract, and then they learned the lesson, and then they added those clauses to every contract afterward. And so the contracts get longer and longer and longer and longer. And right now, anytime you download an app to your phone and it says, I agree to the terms and conditions, and if you ever read the terms and conditions, it becomes this 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-page document that no one reads. And who knows what they're sticking in there and what we're agreeing to. But the point is that all those terms and conditions, that list grew so long because at some point somebody did take advantage of someone else, and then they litigated and found out you need that clause in your contract. And there's a little bit of that going on here. Now, the Gemara asks, with regard to this complex scenario of Rav Safra, which explains why we don't have duplicate deeds, how would it be possible for all of that to occur? But once the creditor repossessed the land the first time as payment of the debt, we, the court, tore the promissory note of the seller's creditor. With what document would the creditor repossess the purchaser's land again? And if you would say that we did not tear the creditor's promissory note in the course of the first collection, well, that cannot be. But doesn't Rav Nachman say that any document of authorization to repossess liened property from its purchaser in which it is not written, we have torn the creditor's promissory note, is not a valid document of authorization to repossess liened property, and any document of authorization used to seize a debtor's property in which it is not written, we have torn the creditor's document of authorization to repossess liened property, is not a valid document of authorization. Right? If it doesn't have these terms, this formula, it's not valid. Why? Because somebody took advantage of it in the past, and we learned that it was necessary. And any document of appraisal of an article's value in which it is not written, we have torn the creditor's document of authorization. This is not a valid document of appraisal. So how could somebody game the system now that the system has anticipated all these ways in which somebody could could rip off somebody else? And the Gemara answers no. It is necessary to explain Rav Safra's case as follows. The concern is not that a creditor will repossess the field, but that someone will come to repossess it based on his claim to the land as the property of his ancestors. Not that somebody else seized it before, but rather that the one who has a claim on the land is saying, when this land was originally sold to this guy, that was not a valid sale 20 years ago. This is my land. Okay, I've been away for 20 years on going on a journey of self-discovery, and I was stranded on an island, and I was trying to get off, and finally got home 20 years later, and I find that my land is now the subject of litigation between two parties, neither one of whom had any right to this land because it's my land, and it was taken from me while I was away on the desert island. That is, he proved that the field had belonged to his ancestors, and by extension belongs to himself as their heir. And the one who sold the field, he was in fact a thief. And it was for this reason that he repossessed the field from the purchaser. And the concern is that the purchaser will seek reimbursement as stipulated in the guarantee from other properties sold subsequently by the seller. If the purchaser has 2 deeds of sale with guarantees, he can collect payment twice. The Gemara presents another question pertaining to Rav Safra's case. Rav Acha of Difti said to Ravina, and why did Rav Safra have to include in his case that the purchaser will say to the creditor, remain quiet about this matter for a few years while I become established in this land that I repossessed, and then come and claim your loan again? Why did he devise a case in which the seller's creditor collects payment twice? Let the problem derive from the fact that since the purchaser holds two deeds, he will be able to repossess land based on his guarantee once, and then repossess land again, even if the creditor does not collect his debt twice. And Ravina answered, if so, if the purchaser attempts to repossess land twice based on a single repossession of the creditor, he will have too many litigants to deal with at once, and his dishonest dealings will be discovered. So the Gemara asks further, but let the court write a proper bill of sale, one that includes a guarantee for this purchaser, and then let the court write a receipt for the seller, stating, all documents that are issued with regard to the purchase of this field are not valid, except for the one issued on this date, referring to the replacement document written by the court. And this will prevent double collection, as if the purchaser attempts to collect on his guarantee with a second document, the seller will foil this attempt by showing his receipt. And the rabbi said before Rav Papa in response to this question, and some say it was said before Rav Ashi, is that to say that the Tana of the Baraisa holds that in general the court does not write a receipt in such cases? Now we're on page 169b. And Rav Papa or Rav Ashi said to them, do not draw this conclusion. It is possible that the Tana of the Baraisa holds that generally the court writes a receipt when a creditor has lost his promissory note. And here, this is the reason that it does not write a receipt, as perhaps the creditor, i.e. the one from whom the property was stolen, will go and repossess property from the purchaser who bought the stolen land, and the purchaser seeking reimbursement in accordance with the guarantee will go and repossess property from other purchasers who had later bought property from the same seller. And the receipt will not help, because it is not with the purchasers who bought property from the seller, but is rather in the possession of the seller himself. And the purchasers, who are the ones who will suffer from the double collection, have no protection. They will, in fact, not even be aware that they are the victims of a double collection. And the Gemara asks, ultimately, don't these purchasers go back to the owner, i.e. the seller of the land, to demand reimbursement? At that point, the seller will produce the receipt, exposing the double collection, and the entire process will be reversed, so that ultimately the purchaser who suffered from the unjust collection will obtain possession of this property. Yeah, sounds good. The whole thing could be reversed, but only at the end of a long litigation, and not everybody can afford to enter into a litigation. The Gemara answers, while it is true that ultimately the deception will become discovered, in the interim between the time the land was unjustly repossessed from the purchaser and the time when the injustice is reversed, the one who repossessed the land seizes the land and consumes its produce, i.e. he enjoys the profits produced by the land, and it will be difficult to receive full reimbursement for this stolen produce. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Alternatively, the reason that the option of writing the receipt for the seller of the land is not pursued here is that there is a concern about one who purchases land without a guarantee, as such a purchaser knows that he has no recourse to be reimbursed from the seller if the land he bought is repossessed. He will never contact the seller and discover that the seller has a receipt and that he has been the victim of an unjust double collection. So the Gemara asks, if so, the same concern should be taken into consideration in the case of a promissory note as well. And yet Rav Papa, or Rav Ashi, said that the Tana of the Baraisa concedes that a receipt may be written for the debtor to enable the collection of a debt in the event of the loss of the promissory note. Why are the aforementioned concerns not applicable in the case of a debt collection, right? We have this concern for real property, but not for a debt. And the Gemara answers, there where the debtor owes money, when the creditor seeks to repossess sold land, the purchaser of that land will say to himself, there's a possibility that the debtor appeased the creditor by paying him money, since debts are usually settled with money. I will therefore investigate the matter with the debtor before allowing the creditor to repossess my land. At that point, the receipt held by the debtor will be discovered and double collection will be prevented. Here, where he owes land, as the issue is that the claim is based on reimbursement for having bought stolen land, The purchaser knows that it is not common for one who is owed land to be appeased with money in such cases. The purchaser will therefore allow his land to be repossessed and will seek reimbursement at a later time. Complicated today. Definitely not easy. But what we really got into is, as a result of centuries of these types of cases coming before the sages, they figured out what kinds of guarantees, what formula for the guarantee, what kinds of documents can be replaced, which cannot, if there has to be a replacement, how are we going to replace it? If somebody loses a promissory note or a deed, it's not that they're going to completely be out. It's just that we're not going to write a replacement document. Rather, we'll do a receipt that explains it was lost. People the guy came before a court, testified, brought evidence, showed that the loan did in fact exist. And so that was proven here that a loan exists, but this is not a replacement promissory note. It's a ratification of the original and missing promissory note, and how that differs for how we deal with a lost deed of sale. Okay, one question from Sharon. Ploni almoni is also used in the book of Ruth. Implication there, right? This sort of generic term that we use in Hebrew or Aramaic for so and so. It's used in the book of Ruth, and the implication there is that this potential redeeming relative is not worth having his name mentioned because he was not interested in raising up the name of Naomi's son. Wonderful reference. Thank you for bringing that up, Sharon. That's what we've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll continue tomorrow with page 170. All right, our tractate is 175 pages, as I recall. So we're headed toward a siyum very soon. I have to see when else we'll do a double daf this week as we try to get caught up. Just one word that on Tuesday night, we're probably going to have class at a different time. I don't want to skip classes if I can avoid it, but it'll have to be a different time because there's this dinner here in LA benefiting the Laniado Hospital in Netanya, Israel, where they're raising funds to build a sheltered emergency room. Important, very important cause. I think we posted the link. I'll post it again on the Facebook page. The honorees are my rabbi, our rabbi, Yekusiel Kalmanson, and then his wife, Hindi, and also Nina and I are honorees at the dinner. I'll be speaking at that dinner with God's help. And so, we're all coming together in this effort to raise funds to build that sheltered ER in Laniado Hospital in Netanya. So that day, I'm thinking, not to make it complicated, we'll probably do the noon schedule, but maybe it'll be a couple hours earlier. I just have to think about it. But at any rate, we won't have it at the normal time on Tuesday because we can't. And so I'll let you know by tomorrow or Monday what the time will be of the Tuesday class, and we'll also post a link if people would like to donate and be part of building that sheltered emergency room in Israel at the Laniado Hospital, a hospital, by the way, that was founded by the great Klausenberger Rebbe, so that there should be a hospital that provides amazing care for everybody that walks in and needs care. That's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, see you tomorrow, Sunday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific.